This is my grandma. She passed away on Friday, June 20th, 2025. She was born in February 1922. This video is dedicated to her. Thank you.
My grandmother was born Altagracia Gonzalez in February of 1922, and she passed away this past Friday at the age of 103, which I think is absolutely amazing. For the first time, my grandmother did not celebrate her birthday in Mexico. My grandmother lived in Los Angeles with my aunt, my dad's youngest sister, and my auntie took care of her. My grandmother lived here in Utah with my parents for a little while, and she really liked it here. She would come and spend a few months here, and then she would go back to California, and she also traveled and spent some time in Mexico, and every year she would have a great big birthday party in February. I was lucky enough to be there for a few of her big birthday celebrations. I was in Mexico in 2019 when we celebrated, was that her 98th birthday? And I think it was. And then I also, in 2021, I was lucky enough to go to California. Actually, 2022, I went to California to celebrate her 100th birthday with her, which was amazing. It was huge. In 2020, during the pandemic, they had a drive-by celebration for her, and everyone drove by and to wish her a happy 99th birthday. Celebrating my grandmother's birthday every year was a really big deal, and my family went all out to make sure that my grandmother had the best birthday celebration every year. And so this year, when I went to Mexico, and this is where my family is from, my grandmother has had her house there in Mexico, and that's the family house. And then my parents just built their house next to my grandmother's. And so it was different to be in Mexico without my grandmother there. Last year, 2024, my oldest daughter and I traveled together to Mexico, and we were there for my grandmother's 102nd birthday. And there's always live music and food and so many people that travel to spend the day with my grandmother for her birthday. It really was a big deal every year, and we had a lot of fun, a lot of great memories. And so it was weird to have been in Mexico earlier this year and not for her to not be there. And I think this was the first year that she didn't get to travel, but she just wasn't feeling well. After my trip to Mexico, I went to California. I was in Mexico in February, and then I spent the month of March in California with Eddie, and that's for two reasons: to go spend time with Eddie, and also my father-in-law passed away in March. And while I was there, whenever I'm in California, I go see my grandmother. And I went to go see my grandmother, and I'm so glad that I was able to be with her for a little while. Whenever I was in California, I would always stop by at the grocery store and pick up some flowers for her and some fruit. My grandmother had a big sweet tooth. I wouldn't get her too many sweets, but I'd get her a variety of her favorite fruit and then show up with some flowers when I showed up to see her earlier this year. She was in and out of sleep. But for a moment there, she woke up, and I went up and gave her a big hug, and she said hello to me. It was really nice. When I received the news on Friday of her passing, I gasped. I had just gotten out of work, and I was walking to my car as I was reading my text messages, and I gasped when I received the notification, and it shocked me a little bit. I spoke to my dad that night. My parents they took a trip to Mexico, but before that, they stopped and spent a few days with my grandmother a couple weeks ago. And I'm so glad that my mom got to spend a few days with my grandmother before they flew to Mexico. So I spoke with my dad on Friday, and you can imagine how he's feeling. But it wasn't until Saturday morning when the reality of her passing kind of, I don't even have the words. And I spent all morning, I was just numb because the reality hit. And I've just known her my whole life. And my grandmother has always been there my entire life. And so this morning, as I woke and faced that reality, I was numb for a good 3 hours and did absolutely nothing but just kind of stared into oblivion. And then I woke up. And I started going through my photographs. And I thought, I am going to document and remember my grandmother in my journal. And so I printed some of the most recent pictures of her. My grandmother has looked the same, at least to me. She's always been the same throughout the years. I see her the same. And I remember when I was a little girl, and my grandmother was still the same. I mean, she hasn't changed. To me, she hasn't changed. And all of these pictures, of her that I have these past 5 years, she's still the same. My grandma, I called her Abuela. And so going through these pictures, there were so many things went through my mind, so many memories. And so many great memories. My sister called me. Well, I spoke with my sister on Saturday morning or Friday. I don't even remember, Friday or Saturday, after we got the news. And my sister says, hey, I just want to let you know that when Mom and Dad were leaving Grandma's house in LA to fly out to Mexico, they asked for Grandma's blessing. And after Grandma gave them their blessing for them to travel, my grandma said to my mom, when you see Lillian, tell her I said hi. Send her my love. My grandma was suffering from dementia. And so for her to have remembered me was really heartwarming. And even when I was there in March earlier this year, when she woke from her naps and she saw that I was there, she remembered me. And that was really special. And so my sister called to tell me that. she knew I would want to hear that. There are so many things I could say about my grandma. When I was young, this is funny. So when I was a little girl, so my grandma was probably about my age. I will be 56 this August. And so I want to say when I was little, probably 8 or 9 years old, my grandma was probably about my age. And I remember we went to Kmart. and this is in LA, and we went to Kmart, and I loved holding my grandma's arm because she had soft skin, really soft, and I loved playing with her like elbow skin because it was so soft. And so earlier today, I went to go feel my elbow, and I've got that same, I'm going to be 56 years old, and so my skin is a little bit squishy around my elbow. And I would hold my grandma's elbow, and she would look at me and she'd say, "Don't do that." It's like she didn't like it because it was squishy skin. And I don't know why that memory came to mind today, but I remember that, and I just loved holding her elbow. It was so I don't know, it was very soothing, very comforting for me to hold my grandma's arm and for me to hold her elbow. It just felt so nice, My grandmother also had the daintiest hands, the most beautiful fingernails, and she had really small and petite hands, and I always admired her hands. And she would get her manicures, and growing up, I remember thinking, when I grow up, I'm gonna have fingernails just like my grandma. And it wasn't until just last year that I decided to let my nails grow, and I now do them in this long, pointy shape because this is what my grandmother's hands look like. She had very long and pointy fingernails, and they were her natural nails. And so seeing my hands remind me of my grandmother's hands, except my grandmother, of course, had very dainty, very petite hands. My grandmother taught me how to properly drink tea out of a teacup because she would play tea with me, and I will never forget that. And she showed me how to hold a teacup and pinky up. It was so sweet. I will never forget those memories. And this is me, when I was around 7, 8, 9 years old. And I may have mentioned this in the past. In fact, in several videos, I talk about my grandma. I talk about how my grandma, is 102, 103 years old. I've mentioned her many times in different videos. And in one video, I talked about train cases. So when I was a little girl, my grandmother had a blue train case, and she would let me play. She knew how much I loved going through her train case. And she had all her jewelry was in the train case, and then she would keep her cosmetics in there too. She used to use Pond's cream, the cold cream. And when I was old enough, to buy my own cosmetics, I remember I used cold cream for years and years to cleanse my face, remove my makeup. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that I stopped using the cold cream. So I'll never forget that. But she would let me play with her train case. And I remember thinking, when I grow up, I can't wait to have my own train case so that I can have all my cosmetics in there. Well, now I have maybe 24 train cases, and I have a blue one, and the blue one will always remind me of my grandma. I have been collecting these train cases for the last 10, 15, longer. In fact, my very first one I purchased shortly after I moved to Utah, which was almost 30 years ago. And so I now have over 24 train cases, and all because of my grandma letting me play with her train case when I was a little girl. So many great memories. Mine don't hold all of the precious things that she held in hers. Mine are full of craft supplies. But I have them throughout my office. I have them in my craft area. And every time I look over at my train cases, they remind me of my grandma. They will always remind me of my grandma. Up until recently, my grandmother had a really, really good memory. And she got to see, I believe it's the sixth generation in my family. There are 5 generations. It's my grandma, my dad, me, my daughter, and my granddaughters. That's 5 generations. But I have older cousins, and I believe there were 6 generations. And my grandmother knew each and every one of her grandkids, great-grandkids, great-great-grandkids. Was there great-great-great-grandkids? I wish I could tell you for sure. My dad came from a large family. My grandmother was married at a very, very young age. My grandmother was very private about her youth. I would often ask her questions about, her childhood and her parents, but she was very reserved about her young life because she would always change the subject. And I know that my dad and my dad's siblings and my auntie who took care of my grandma have her story, but I wanted to learn more about my grandma, but my grandma would not share her life, her stories with me or with anybody really. She was very private, and I honestly don't know why. I wish I knew more about her childhood. I just know that she was married very young. I want to say she was 13 or 14 years old when she was married. My grandfather passed away a little over 20 years ago, so my grandmother's been a widow for that long. Here in my parents' house, where I'm currently living, on the main floor, my parents have a spare bedroom. And when my grandmother lived here 10, 15 years ago, she stayed in that bedroom. And I can't remember how long she lived here. And then she went back to California. But she's not lived here for close to 15 years. But we still refer to that bedroom as Grandma's room. So it's now like a catch-all room, but it's also a guest bedroom / toy room / TV room. It's a lot of different things. But whenever we refer to that spare bedroom, we always call it Grandma's room. And it will always be Grandma's room. The kids all say that my grandma was really strict. And by kids, I mean my daughters and my sister's kids, when they were younger, 15 years ago. They would say that my grandma was really strict, but they also remembered that she would get up in the morning and do her exercises, and they all thought that was so cute that she did that. I don't remember my grandmother being strict, at least not with me. I didn't know her that way. She was always really sweet with me, and she was just sweet to everybody. That's just how I saw her. And so I don't know what they're talking about. Maybe they weren't behaving. My grandma showed me how to make lentil soup, and she said the key ingredient for lentil soup is fresh cilantro. If you don't use fresh cilantro in your lentils, they're not going to be good. So whenever I make lentil soup, because I love lentil soup, always reminds me of my grandma. And you can't forget that cilantro. Thank you so much for being here with me today and letting me share this moment with you. I'm glad that I had these pictures in my camera roll, and I'm glad that I was able to spend some time remembering her as I was creating these layouts. This is all I did today, and that's okay. I did absolutely nothing else. My youngest daughter, Cayenne, came over with my 2 grandbabies, and they spent the day here with me. And the 4 of us did absolutely nothing. Just hang out and talk. And that was a nice day. I have a short prayer for my grandma. Dear Lord, we come before you with heavy hearts, mourning the loss of our beloved grandmother. We thank you for the gift of her life, for her love, her wisdom, and the joy she brought to our lives. We ask for your comfort and peace to surround us as we grieve, and for your eternal light to shine upon her. May her soul find rest in your loving embrace. We cherish the memories we have of her and ask that you help us to honor her legacy. Amen. Thank you, friends, for being here with me today. I appreciate you so much for all of your love and support. Until next time, thank you. Bye.